time I ever stood at this podium, very first time I ever stood behind this microphone, was June 25th, 2002. A signal day in my life, and I hope a signal day in the life of the 7th District. It was the day that I was elected to the United States Congress. It's the day that I defeated Earl Hilliard. I remember standing behind the stage and looking out this audience. That barrier was knocked down that night. That barrier was knocked down. The room was opened up, and we squeezed about 1,000 people into the space. All the TV cameras went live for their 10 o'clock news. Ben Shale had the smart idea that it's good to give a victory speech during the 10 o'clock news. He assumed his candidate had time to write one, which he didn't. I remember standing up here and looking out at a sea of faces who represented every part of Alabama life. They were the long-time folks who worked in the trenches in black politics. There were some young people who hadn't gotten engaged previously in politics. There were some older people who remembered the past but had never engaged in a political campaign before. There were lawyers, there were doctors, there were people who were unemployed. There were people from every possible walk of life. There were Democrats, and yes, there were a few Republicans who made their way in, and we were glad they were there because we intended to provide a representation that would span across party lines. Few people from outside the state of Alabama had even come over because they had read about the race and got engaged by what we were doing. A few weeks ago, I had an opportunity to look at that speech for the first time in a long time. And my mother's watched it 50 times. But I looked at it for the first time in a while. Other than being stunned at how young looking I was and how skinny I was, I listened to what I had to say. What I said that night was that I trusted the public to listen to an argument, to process different points of view, and to make the right decision about their self-interest and their political future. I talked about trust, in other words. In the last 7 years, I've stood behind this podium a number of times and given a number of what I would consider to be major speeches. I spoke to your group, you may remember, 4 years ago in 2005. And I remember telling you that we were approaching the time in American political life when a woman would not just think about the presidency, but would compete in the most aggressive, most effective kind of way. And may or may not win, but would set a standard that would be remembered. I told you that the time would come when a woman would again be on a national ticket for either party, and you might or might not support her, but you would appreciate the fact that in a country where her grandmother could not exercise the right of suffrage, that she was about to be possibly one heartbeat away from the presidency. I remember telling you that that time might come sooner than you anticipated. I trusted that the electorate of this country was good enough and enlightened enough to make possible what you saw in 2008. 18 million votes for a woman on the Democratic side, many, many tens of millions of votes for a woman who ran on the Republican side in the fall. And whether you voted for them, whether you contributed to them, whatever you thought of Hillary Clinton or Sarah Palin, both of them put their shoulders to the wheel and moved America closer to being a more perfect union. I'm convinced of that. In other words, I talked about trust. trusting in the country to move. I remember being here in 2003 speaking to the Rotary Club. A few weeks before the state voted on Amendment 1. And I did the unconventional thing. I went on record endorsing it, even though people said this will hurt you politically. People said this is not the smartest thing to do long term. You ought to be playing party politics. If Bob Riley's for it, you ought to be saying you're against it. I came out for it because I believed that people in my district would be hurt if we didn't do something. And I trusted people to make the right decision. And even if the decision wasn't right in the short term, I trusted that the debate would move Alabama forward in the long term. And I remember talking that day in August 2003 about the need to rebuild trust in Alabama politics. Because I made the diagnosis that day that if Amendment 1 fails, it will not be because of the specific things written in the bill. It would be because the people of our state did not have enough trust that their government would act in a wise way, and they wouldn't have enough trust in public purpose to give more resources to state government. In other words, I talked about the cost of not having enough trust in public purpose in politics. As I have moved around this state over the last several weeks, and for that matter, the last several years, so many people have come up to me and said, we don't believe that government in this state can work for our interests. Young, old, leaning left, leaning right, urban, rural, so many people have said to me, we think that politics in Alabama is dominated by a few, and that it's government of the few, by the few, for the narrow. I happen to believe that whoever has the honor of being sworn in as governor of this state on January 15, 2011, is going to have one big decade-long task. It is rebuilding confidence that our government in Montgomery can be wise, disciplined, oriented around the common good and not the interests of a narrow few. There will be specific policy challenges. Yes, the next governor of Alabama is going to have to figure out how we mend the wounds from a recession that has devastated and hurt more people than any economic storm in a generation. Yes, the next governor of Alabama is going to have to figure out how to build a budget and manage a budget when all the federal money we've gotten from the stimulus has run its course. Yes, the next governor of Alabama is going to have to figure out how we take our desire to have quality public education that any one of you could confidently send your children to, how we can turn that goal into public policy. Yes, the next governor of Alabama is going to have to figure out how we level the walls and the barriers between urban and rural Alabama. Yes, the next governor of Alabama is going to have to figure out how we manage our resources better so that we're cleaner and greener and more efficient. Yes, the next governor will have many specific challenges. But what will overarch every one of those challenges is a basic question: can we build confidence in public institutions in a way that lets us tackle these tough problems? And I would submit that today we could not do it. And here's why. 2 years ago, 2007, we were number 4 in the country in the number of public officials under indictment. Number 4. Not in percentage, but in raw numbers.